Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do my broker chat, and I am going to go ahead and record to the cloud so that it is there. And we are talking today. Let me share my screen here. We're going to talk about FIRPTA. Super important that we know how to protect our buyers. So we are going to start talking, and we're going to talk about how to be the best possible buyer's agent in today's world is way more complicated. Hey.
Hold on. I had my,
okay.
Are you good to go now, Ann?
I am good to go. And I pressed record to the cloud so that at some other time, if someone wants to listen, they can. Okay. I thought I would just roll, and that way it's there, and hopefully people will begin to figure out that this is a valuable 30 minutes in a week. But so we're going to talk about the Foreign Investment in Real Property Act. And you might ask, why are we talking about that? Well, here's the thing. In our lovely little contract 1 to 4 that we have, it actually makes it perfectly clear that if a seller is a foreign person as defined by the Internal Revenue Code, all right, then buyer shall. It doesn't say seller shall. It doesn't say title company shall. It doesn't say lender shall. It says buyer shall withhold from the sales proceeds an amount sufficient to comply with applicable tax law and deliver the same, so the buyer has to pay the same to the Internal Revenue Service. So if the seller is a foreign person and that money is not collected at closing, it becomes the buyer's responsibility. Now, I know that you all think title companies do this, and that's not true. And fewer title companies are taking care of this for you every day, fewer and fewer title companies. So we want to talk about what to do and how to do this. All right. Number 1, in a listing agreement, please note on that back page, 10 of 10, right, where all the bold things are written. They're written very dark and dominant so that they pop out at you. Number I is about the seller telling you right now if they are or are not a foreign person. It is super important that you not leave this blank, because if they are a foreign person, that roughly 30% of the sales price is going to have to be collected at closing. And if they are not a foreign person, they're going to have to sign something saying they are not, and that tax must not be collected. All right, so it's in our contract, it's in our listing agreement. You guys need to be way smarter about it. So the basics, what FIRPTA is and how it works. FIRPTA imposes a tax on capital gains derived from foreign persons in real estate. So you're not a citizen here, you don't have a green card here, you may have a tax identification number, but even that is not a guarantee that you don't owe this capital gains tax. You bought a home here, you probably don't pay other kinds of taxes. So when you go to sell, capital gains tax is going to apply. Okay. The title company normally, but not always, and is not required to, facilitates this function, right? They usually do help you along, but you need to start asking if they are, particularly when you get out in rural areas or in newer title companies. You just want to ask every time, what kind of form do they have people sign? Okay, let me stop share here for a minute and start share again. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're starting to ask how this is handled. All right, here are some easy guidelines. FIRPTA's been around a long time, since 1980. Many realtors are aware of the withholding requirement, even if they're not aware of exactly how it works, right? Here's some guidelines. If the amount realized, the sales price, is $300,000 or less, and the buyer who's buying it will use it as a residence, so not an investment, not a rental home, then no sums need to be withheld. If it's over $300,000, then it does have to be withheld, 10%. If the amount realized exceeds $1 million, then it's 15%. Okay, so you don't really have to know these guidelines. You just have to be aware that if it is a foreign person selling, your buyer, you need to be sure this gets taken care of at closing. The big question in determining if FIRPTA applies is to deal with whether the seller is a foreign person or a U.S. person. This is not a personal question, right? This is an IRS definition of this, okay? So a seller who is a U.S. citizen or a U.S. permanent resident with a green card is generally exempt, right? Keep in mind that having an individual tax ID number doesn't tell you whether they're a foreign person or not, right? But probably they know if they've been filing income tax. So probably they know if the IRS considers them a foreign person or not. All right, frequently asked questions, right? You can see here, this is the IRS rules place the responsibility for the withholding on the buyer of real property from a foreign entity, on the buyer. These are just other good questions. The seller is foreign but has a social security number. We're okay, right? If the seller is foreign, it is likely they do not have a social security number. But if they do have a social security number, then yes, they would be exempt. But probably what they have is a tax ID number, which does not mean they are exempt from this withholding. Okay. And then this says the FIRPTA withholding was paid at close of escrow, but not that much money was due. How does the seller get their money back? And so there is a special form for withholding. There's a whole series of things that have to occur. So again, you want a title company that's going to step up and facilitate this along the way, or your buyer will have to hire an accountant who's familiar with the steps that need to be taken. Remember, if this doesn't get handled with the seller at closing, it is your buyer's responsibility. All right. No withholding is required if the buyer receives the seller's certification of non-foreign status. So at closing, you are looking for the seller to sign something about not being a foreign person. And typically title companies are asking for this, but we've had a rush lately. I would call it all the way to a rush, where title companies are not asking anymore. They don't want that responsibility anymore. It's become more contentious and they don't want to ask. Well, if they're not asking and if they're not getting that form, then that is a potential issue for your buyer. So you need to go back, right? On the listing agreement that the seller signed, it says they either are or are not. So you can ask for a copy of that page. You can send them a form. I'm going to show you what form. And it's getting very much more complicated out there than we wish it was. The Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, that's FIRPTA, right, requires buyers in certain transactions involving foreign sellers to withhold funds for federal taxes. Does either agent have liability in such a transaction where the seller falsely certifies that he is not a foreign seller? And the answer is possibly, but only if you know they're lying. You would have to know they're lying, and then that could involve you as being responsible. What if I represent a foreign seller and he cannot afford to have the tax taken out of his proceeds, right? So there is an application that they should have filled out way earlier in the process to have that withholding amount lowered. They do negotiate that apparently all the time. So remember back to the listing agreement. I'm going to go back, listing agreement, right? This is the listing agreement. If they check, yes, seller is a foreign person, then you want to be sure that they're already have an accountant or already are in the process of negotiating how much they're going to have to pay. All right. What rules apply to a buyer who is purchasing property in Texas, so this is Texas specific from a foreign seller, it's the same rules, right? 300,000 or less being used as a residence, nothing. 300,000 to $1 million, 10%, and $1 million and above, 15%. And that's 15% of $1 million sales price. Okay, so that's $150,000 that need to be withheld. All right, here is a great one page. It's from Old Republic Title, gives a wonderful explanation about FIRPTA and helps just explain. All right, and then this is from a title company, one of our popular title companies here locally, and they have a seller information sheet where they send it and they ask for social security numbers. If the seller cannot provide them, then what they do is they notify the buyer's agent. So at some point, if we're not knowledgeable about FIRPTA, we could potentially have an issue with our buyer. All right. And then this is a different title company who said, when we have a transaction where the seller is a foreign person, we ask them to complete a form, a W-8 BEN, and provide it to the buyer. The form is found on the IRS website, and then the buyer needs this information from this form to complete these and turn it into the IRS, right? So they're withholding the money at closing, but it's still the buyer's duty to submit it to the IRS. I bet most of you didn't know that, right? Most of you listening. Here's the forms. So that money is withheld at closing, and these are the forms that your buyer needs to complete and turn into the IRS with the payment. Okay, next time we broker chat, it will be on actually not June 20th. That's not true because that's a day off, a federal day off. So we'll broker chat next on June 27th, and it will be all about mineral rights. So I'm gonna stop share here for a minute. Do any of y'all have any questions about that? Are you surprised a little bit by it being the buyer's duty? We have had a rash of situations where the buyer coulda, shoulda, woulda been really stuck if the title company had not been helpful at the last minute. We've had deals fall apart because the seller was not aware they had to pay that. So then they chose not to sell their property. It's just a jungle out there right now. And I'm mostly bringing it up and want you to hear me because title companies are deciding they don't want this duty. It's not their legal duty to ask these questions or to help with these forms. They don't have to. So they're not wanting to anymore. They feel like it should be between a buyer and a seller. And the real estate contract makes it between the buyer and the seller. The listing agreement asks the seller the question. And too many title companies are saying, hey, you know, this is hard. This is complex. This is one extra step, and we don't have to do that. So
It just seems like a lot of, have to have a whole lot of knowledge over something like that. You know, it's a little bit scary, the things that we're sometimes the things that we're supposed to know and know.
Well, absolutely. And I think the truth is, if I were an agent today, right, what I would do is make sure I'm super knowledgeable so that my listing agreement is filled out correctly. And so that when I represent a buyer, I go immediately to the title company and ask them what kind of forms they have people fill out. Will they notify me if there's no social security number? Will they notify me if there are any, because if they've got a social security number, then they don't have to pay FIRPTA. So what I need to know is what forms is the title company going to get? And then if they're not going to get any, then I have to know enough to know, okay, this buyer needs to go talk to an accountant.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm trying to choose these broker chat topics just because I feel like there's a lot going on that we in our normal business aren't paying attention to. And so I don't think this is a panic thing. I think it's just a no, right? It's always been on that listing agreement. We just have to be sure we get it checked. And then when I mean, it's just a box. Just make sure there's something, one box or the other is checked. And then make sure that you're talking to the title company if you represent the buyer about, okay, do you send out a form and find out if they have a social security number? Will you let me know something, right? So that you know if the answer is no, we don't touch that with a 10-foot pole. And it kind of, Tori, it doesn't surprise me that title companies are trying to do less controversial stuff, right? They just don't want to do, that's not their job in their opinion.
And so you think like in that case, like if we are triggered as a listing agent, obviously do not gloss over any of the agreement, but making sure we are hitting that box and checking that box correctly and not just making an assumption one way or another. And then from there, that would then trigger us to say, hey, you really probably ought to talk to your CPA or, a tax professional, even prior to us going on the market to make sure that nothing is, that we're good with everything and nothing is going to hold us up.
That's right. I think that's exactly what you need to do. Is if they check is a foreign person, then there's another call they need to make.
Okay.
So question for you guys, is it, what was I gonna say? Is the title companies that we work with most often, like Title Resources and Freedom Title, are those any of the companies that are not doing this? Or
so I didn't ask Freedom Title. So and actually I didn't ask Title Resources either. So I don't know the answer to that. Here's what I do know is it's one question to ask what they're asking at closing. Are you getting a social security number? Are you letting me know if you can't get a social, if there's not a social for the seller?
okay, thank you.
I'm pretty sure that they are, Deanna, on those two title companies. I'm pretty sure that they are getting all the information pretty quickly. So I think those two are okay, but you could, like Ann says, just call them and ask them and make sure.
And I think right now, we're selling all over the place. And if a different title company really matters to people, you just really need to know, because the dollar amounts are so big. I mean, if it's a $400,000 house, 10% is $40,000. So it's a big deal.
A lot of money.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a problem most of the time. I think most of the time sellers know they're foreign. They know they're going to have to do it. Like, I don't think it's news. But we've just had a rash of where it was news, and it causes transactions to fall apart and creates issues. So our goal is to be the best possible buyer's rep. That's our goal. Best possible buyer's rep. So if that's what we're trying to be, then this is part of that learning, right? Why do they not want a discount broker? Why do they not want to work with the cheapest buyer's agent in town? Well, this is part of why not, right? Because we know things, we can keep them safer than someone who's super cheap.
Good point.
Well, this is why, right? This is why you pay to be at Keller Williams. This is why you don't discount your commission. This is why, because you're taking the time to attend this or watch this video so that you're the best possible buyer rep. And therefore you have to discount a whole lot less. I mean, these days, if someone asked me about discounting my commission, that one of my first questions would be, so do you know what FIRPTA is? And do you know how to protect yourself as a buyer?
Good point.
Betting the answer is no, I don't know what it is. And no, I don't know how to protect myself.
Yeah, for sure.
So they need good people, right? I mean, that's the
Yes.
thing. They need good people. So next Monday is a holiday. So it'll be the following Monday, July 27th. And we're going to talk about all things mineral rights.
Okay. And then did you not? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, and then you won't have one July 4th because it's July 4th. Right. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jan. I appreciate you.
Well, and I'm recording because I know, the middle of the day is not easy for everybody, but I am recording. So if you want to just put out, that they're available, then you can, and hopefully that will help people too.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. You guys are awesome. Thanks.
Thanks.